All right, good evening all. Hope you're all doing well. It's November 1st, and that means certainly for us in the UK, this is really the very start of what feels like winter. Um, I don't spend a huge amount of time on social media or YouTube shorts or anything like that these days, but there's one topic that I seem to be coming across a lot right now, and that's this concept of the winter arc. Um, you might be one of the many people who sat here on November 1st, preparing to enter this kind of phase of hibernation to soon emerge the fitter, more attractive, more complete, more productive version of yourself. And you're planning this next 90 days of isolation and of self-focus and of ambitious goal setting and execution. And look, for me personally, not that I called it the winter arc back in the day. I actually realised on watching some of these videos, I've been through a few such processes now. Usually 1 to 3 to 6 month processes of real, again, self-focus and development. And so what I wanted to do in the furore of different motivational montages and hashtag inspiration influencers that you're probably watching at the moment is share a bit of an alternative view, an alternative take on the winter arc. I've brought 5 concepts that I'd like to discuss. My hope being that maybe 1, maybe 2, or a couple of the things that I share and recommend, and some of the principles that underpin them might be useful as you consider your own goals, your own ambitions for this next 90 days, and indeed plan out some of the end targets, but also the day-to-day activity that you're going to be committing to over your personal winter arc. So those 5 concepts, just to give you a bit of a preview. I'm going to encourage everyone to be smart about your goals. I'm going to encourage everyone to try and let their subconscious do as much of the work as possible. I'm going to be talking a little bit about the importance of finding flow and how this next period of time could be a great way for you to do that. I'm going to be talking about the importance of using this time to strengthen the self, both self-image, but also self-esteem, self-love and self-respect. And then the importance of action and the relatively lower importance of words when it comes to delivering on your goals for your winter arc. So let's get started with goals. Now, by way of background, I was a personal trainer and a strength coach for about 5 years before I found myself in the wacky world of tech sales. And so we learned a lot about setting what we would call SMART goals that were specific and measurable and achievable and da-da-da-da-da-da. I think that's all good, but what I want to encourage you to do is take a slightly more philosophical view on the goals that you're setting and really think carefully before you set up your ambitions and write them down, to really think about how you can do a few things. Number 1, with your goals, how can you embrace focus and do less better? There's an old adage that if you try and do everything, you end up doing about the square root of nothing. Not that that's verbatim. There's a temptation when we start thinking about these periods ahead of us of self-improvement that we think about all of the things that we could improve about ourselves and our lives and that we might want to achieve. And we try and find the way of most efficiently allocating every minute of our time proportionately to achieve 100 different things in a day, in a week, and in a 90-day period. The end result of that, typically I find, is twofold. Number 1, you end up doing pretty mediocre work across lots of different things. You don't really get that satisfaction and success from one thing. The second thing that tends to happen as a direct result of that is you feel a deep sense of disappointment, of dejection, maybe even of failure, that you didn't manage to maximally succeed in all the different things that you were planning on doing. So, practical advice here. When you look at your next 90 days and the things that you want to improve on, don't pick 10. Start with 1, add a second, and maybe add a third. And as far as you can, once you have those 3, try and focus on foundational improvements. Now, what do I mean by that? Rather than setting an incredibly specific goal to achieve one thing, unless that is the thing that you are just wholeheartedly committed to, what I'd encourage you to do is focus on things like, how can you get a little bit smarter? How can you learn something that has applicability in lots of different areas and lots of different possible avenues for the future? How can you focus on those things that and for which strength will never be a weakness? Now, I can't tell you what that is, of course. For me, that might mean that it's rarely going to be a bad thing for me to be a little bit fitter, a little bit stronger, a little bit leaner, a little bit more physically capable, as an example. It's unlikely to ever be a weakness that I know a little bit more about the way that my mind works, or the way that the body works, or the way that politics, science, and philosophy work. These are what I mean by foundational capabilities. Pick goals that enable you to build those. Number one, you'll find it probably intrinsically more satisfying and useful over the course of 90 days, but you'll also find they have a great long-term effect in really being the person ultimately that you want to be as a result of this 90 days and onwards. And then finally, when we're talking about the concept of focus, I'd like to encourage everyone to be very, very careful when setting goals, that you're focused on the things that you can control. You're not focused on necessarily external outcomes of that, particularly those things that aren't in your direct control. Setting yourself a goal to earn a certain amount of money, for example, within the next, say, 90 days, is immediately leaving yourself exposed to a lot of external variables, which mean that you may or you may not succeed. Either way, it's not in your control. What is in your control is more process driven. You are in control ultimately as to whether you read your 10 pages every day, whether you complete your skincare routine, whether you get into the gym and complete the sets, reps, and exercises that you plan to. You're in control of those things. We'll talk more later about why that's so important, but principally, just from the perspective of the likelihood of you achieving what you want to achieve, if it's in your control and you have ownership of it at a process level, you're much, much more likely to succeed. So be smart about your goals. Embrace focus, do less better. Focus on foundational improvements and focus on the things that you can control. That's number one. Number two, letting your subconscious do the work. Now, this is an interesting concept. I was introduced, albeit belatedly, to a book by a friend a few months ago called Psycho-Cybernetics. Very, very well-known book. Is outside the scope of this conversation to tell you all about it, but the basic premise is this. There is huge, huge power in understanding the relationship between conscious intention and your subconscious mind in the way that you execute. By that I mean, your subconscious mind, so says the book, acts like a servo mechanism. The concept of a servo mechanism in something like a guided missile, for example, is if you give it a target and you prescribe that target, it will find that target having been launched pretty much all of its own accord, autonomously, based on environmental feedback as it goes. Once that missile is launched, it's no longer in the continuous control of the operator or the person that prescribed that target and launched it. Rather, it uses a series of negative and positive feedback loops to continually correct its course until ultimately it lands where it needs to. So it's said that your mind operates in a similar way. If you can set a very, very clear intention with your conscious mind as to what you want to achieve, where you want to go, who you want to be, the progress you want to make, you actually then need to think less about the steps that you take to get there. You don't need to be so conscious and cognitively engaged in every action and behavior that leads you along the way. The power of this is, for me, twofold. Number one, and this goes back to a great quote from, I think it was Jordan Peterson, You can have what you want in 5 years, but you need to know what it is and you have to aim for it. It's a great exercise to visualize very clearly, at least in this example, where you want to be at the end of this 90-day period, to internalize that image and that message. But once you've done that, and so long as you're appropriately reminding yourself of that, get out of your own way. Don't micromanage yourself. There's a real risk when you try and control every single action and behavior in the pursuit of a goal, that a couple of things happen. Number one, you actually interrupt the natural and instinctive forces that will most efficiently guide you towards a target, because we are goal-driven animals. Number two, it's very, very draining. You end up using a huge amount of your mental resource on dealing with the things that are right in front of you, consciously controlling and managing every single step of your day, week, month, and otherwise. And you lose that cognitive energy for the things that actually matter. Strategy, goal setting, and deliberate drive towards what you want to achieve. Now, if you're going to employ this kind of exercise, this kind of method, number one, I'd actually encourage you read the book. There's some fantastic exercises and principles explained in much more depth that I think A, are really interesting, and B, actually quite instructive for a psychology, self-help kind of genre. I would also recommend this. Have real clarity in real definition if you're going to set a visual intention as to what that intention is. One of the exercises that I really liked, and I forget actually who originated this now, I'll link it in the description, is what's called the perfect day exercise. Take 20 minutes, take 30 minutes. Meditate without distraction. Think very, very carefully, slowly, methodically, and in a lot of detail about what your perfect day looks like. What are you doing? Where are you? Who are you with? What do you see? What do you hear? What do you smell? When during that day you look in the mirror, who's looking back at you? Visualize and crystallize these things very, very clearly. And then, as I say, get out of the way. Let your subconscious do the work. Don't micromanage yourself. Have clarity of vision. Number three, finding flow. So another great book recommendation, this one from Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, I believe is the name. It's a book called Flow, The Psychology of Optimal Human Experience. Flow is a bit nebulous to describe, but it's probably best summarized as the unthinking, undistracted, almost somewhat uncontrolled sensation of being in the zone when you're performing an activity in which you are fully immersed, fully engaged, and in such a situation that really is the only thing that you're presently aware of, and ultimately the only thing that you can engage with at the time. People experience flow when playing music, when reading books, when writing books, when playing sports. They're all great examples of flow. Really, what it means in principle, and again, it's a book I'd recommend reading to go into the detail, but what it means in principle, and for the sake of this conversation, as you go through this next 90 days, do your best to be present in execution. What do I mean by that? When we look at productivity, goal setting, and self-improvement, again, it becomes a sterile process pretty quickly. We try and optimize everything we can, and we're constantly thinking about how can I fit the most #productivity into my day. The risk of that is that when actually you're executing on the things that you need to do, you're scarcely giving it your full attention and full focus. You're thinking behind to what you've done that previous day. You're thinking ahead to what you must do for the rest of the day and how you're going to record it. And it creates a huge amount of cognitive noise. It actually makes it difficult to A, enjoy the process and thus fully commit to it. B, it actually reduces the quality of your execution. If you're pursuing a fitness goal, for example, you're going on your 17th run of the month up and down the moors in Scotland, where I'm sure it's something like -4 degrees already. If you're engaged in that run and you're constantly thinking to yourself as you go, God, this is hard. God, this is a lot of work. I've already done 10 runs in the last 10 days. Oh, I've still got 30 runs still to go to hit my goal. Oh, I've also got to do this and that and read my 10 pages, and you're going to end up really suffering. And actually, you're not going to run as effectively. You're not going to get the same kind of results of it. So finding flow is important, and ultimately will make your whole process more enjoyable and more productive. Now, there are different ways to make sure you're achieving it. I've experimented a lot personally with mindfulness, and I've found that a very, very useful practice, particularly given my particular neurological configuration. What can be equally important in doing that is when you're choosing your goals and choosing your activities and choosing your execution method, focus on those activities that you know can introduce in you a sense of flow. Focus on the environments in which, if you look back, you've tended to feel that way. Reduce distractions that discourage a state of flow. Encourage those, again, activities, environments that encourage it. Find flow. Number 4, use this time, if possibly you can, to do something for you. Seems kind of obvious, doesn't it? It's kind of what the whole winter arc is about, right? But when we dig beneath the surface, I think in a lot of the goals that we set and the things that we tell ourselves and others that we're going to do, we're not actually doing it truly for ourselves. We're doing it to achieve some sort of standard in other people's eyes. We're doing it as something to allow us to say that we've done it afterwards, or to say that we're going to do it beforehand as well. Strengthening the self, your self-esteem, your self-image, your relationship with yourself is a mammoth task for a lot of us. I spent my entire 20s just trying to do it and manage that distance. I was very reliant through a lot of these sorts of exercises and just more generally on external validation. It was important that other people saw and congratulated the work that I did, thought that I was a good person for it, perhaps. In reality, I'd encourage anyone listening, especially if you're younger, in planning your goals and in execution, think continuously about how you can strengthen the self. Keep your promises to yourself. Don't overpromise. Don't underdeliver. Use that to build confidence. That's really important in my personal experience. Chris Williamson, on one of his podcasts, shared a lovely little quote. It was, if you had a friend who every time you asked him or her out for drinks, for a coffee, to go to the gym with you, whatever, they ducked out last minute, had an excuse, didn't show up, and started flaking, eventually you would stop inviting that friend. You might not even call them a friend anymore. Similarly, if you continually break the promises you make to yourself by over-promising or by under-delivering or both, well, you end up wanting to divorce yourself from friendship with you. That creates a real problem, a real distance in your relationship with yourself. It reduces your confidence that you are going to do the things that you say you're going to do. And ultimately, it leaves you with the inevitable gnawing feeling that you are not everything that you could be. And if you've got to sit with that, man, it's tough sometimes. So for this next 90 days, in an exercise of self-love and patience and acceptance, do the things you're doing for you. Keep your promises to yourself and think about the ways that in that process you can build real, deep, intrinsic worth and confidence from what you're about to do. Don't do it for other people. Be very, very mindful about the goals that you're setting or the way you're communicating them for the sake of external validation. And then number 5, This is an interesting one. Words are a proxy for action, so it says. As you probably picked up a couple of times through this conversation, your mind has a bit of a tricky time sometimes distinguishing imagined reality from real reality. Part of the beauty, the blessing and the curse of the human condition is that we are unique in our ability to have mental models and images of both the past, but also particularly of the future. When we talk about all the great things that we're going to do to ourselves or to others, that elicits a feeling and an impulse of satisfaction, a hit of dopamine, a bit of excitement. It's very, very similar to the feeling that you get when you actually go and do something and achieve it. The issue is when you speak about something too much, you give yourself that little bit of a reward, but you haven't actually done the thing, and it diminishes your motivation and your sense of responsibility to do the thing. Let actions speak. Within reason, I wouldn't recommend telling all of your friends or your followers or your family about all the great things you're going to do in this next 90 days. I would recommend that you do it. Let them see you do it. Let the results speak for themselves. Now, there's a few other concepts here that are probably worth understanding about that as well. The concept of demand avoidance is an interesting one. That classic case where you don't mind doing something, but if someone else tells you to do it, then you're going to resist that pretty hard. It creates friction internally. You're just about to get up and do the washing, and your partner says no more than 30 seconds before you were about to get up, hey, would you mind doing the washing? Why suddenly do we then not want to do it anymore? Because someone else told us to. Really throughout this whole process, and really, I suppose in many ways, combining these 5 different points together, make sure that your winter arc is something that you own, that you use as a time to build intrinsic value, confidence, and strength, that you build foundational habits, patterns, and experiences that make a meaningful difference, not just now, not just in the next 90 days, but for the future as well. At the end of the day, when it comes down to it, time, yours and others, will remember actions and remember results. Only you will really remember the journey. So get intimate with it, stay present with it, make sure it's something internally valuable to you. If you want to get fitter, you want to get stronger, you want to have better skin, you want to be a little more articulate, start learning a new language, play an instrument, whatever it might be, make sure it's something that you intrinsically value. Another way of looking at this, and I think this is probably a useful way to wrap it up, as you look ahead to the next 90 days, maybe think a little bit less about having a great 90 days. Focus, if you can, on having one great day 90 times. Think about what that great day looks like, how it starts, how it ends, how you spend your time during that day. Get intimate and present in execution every step you take throughout it, and then just start stringing them together. Build up that head of steam, and you'll end up in a place and as a person that is sustained, again, not just for these next 3 months, but for much, much longer thereafter. In the meantime, go and have a great winter arc, or hibernation period, or wintering, whatever we want to call it. Look after yourselves, look after each other, and I will look forward to the next conversation.